There has been a call right now because of the screw-up on the part of the FBI right now in dropping the ball on this intelligence that they got their hands on concerning Nicholas Cruz back only, about 6 weeks ago. Well, the governor of Florida says, maybe the FBI director should resign right now. No ifs, ands, or buts. Well, the attorney general of Florida over the weekend telling me not so fast. Take a look. What do you think of that?
Well, Neil, I mean, you can't even say dropping the ball. That's such an understatement. Chris Wray has only been with the FBI about 5 months at the helm. And, some of these happened prior. I think one did happen January when he was here. But let's see what he does. And if he does a full investigation and the people who had that information and did not do anything with it, they are the ones that need to go.
All right, so she held off necessarily saying the FBI director should be the one to go right now, but she did part company with the Florida governor saying that the director should go right now. Let's get the read on all of this and how the president has been addressing this with presidential historian Doug Wead, who reminds me, of course, in recent decades, presidents have served this role of being consolers in chief at some tragic times. I was mentioning, Doug, and it's very good to have you, the timing of all of this and the Russia investigation and now the indictment of these 13 Russian entities and additional Russian companies. And as interesting as that was for the president to obsess to the degree he did, took away, at least with the Florida tragedy, but that was a missed opportunity. My eyes, I'm not a presidential historian, you are. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I agree with you. It was a missed opportunity, but Trump's just a whole new ballgame. We're having to learn from him. And in fairness to Trump, he has no hatchet man. Eisenhower had Nixon. Nixon had Spiro Agnew. They always had a hatchet man who was usually the vice president, which was handpicked for that role to get out there and defend the president. Nobody's defending Trump, so I guess he feels like he has to do it himself. So he was out there on this Russian thing, and that took away from the poignancy and the tragedy of Florida.
But, maybe it's a case of, given the timing of all of this, and they're both big stories, I don't minimize that, but when H.R. McMaster at the NSA was saying in Munich that that the evidence of Russian interference in the last election was really incontrovertible, and then the president tweeting out later on, correcting McMaster, that Russia's efforts had not swung the election to anyone but himself. So it was an immediate, you got this wrong to talk about how this didn't affect the results. Well, Rod Rosenstein had said as much. The indictment said as much. McMaster had earlier said as much. So what was the benefit of adding that?
Well, he's the president of the United States, and he's having a heck of a time. We elected him. We didn't elect McMasters. We didn't elect Tillerson. We didn't elect John Kelly, who was out there a few weeks ago talking about how he's changed his opinion on the wall. So I can see it being somewhat frustrating for Donald Trump. The media still thinks of him as this little amateur boy who got elected. I think he's a very sophisticated politician.
No, he's the duly elected president. I fully agree there. I don't know how we can keep debating that. But I guess what worries me a little bit is, why can't he say and just say it, all right, it's incontrovertible proof now that the Russians were trying to insert themselves and sow confusion in the election, even right after the election, by ginning up these rallies, one for Hillary Clinton, the other for Donald Trump. So we know they were doing that. You as president want to make sure that, since you're the establishment guy now, as my last guest pointed out, to make sure it doesn't happen again in 2018, right?
Yeah, and I think he would and he could if he had a hatchet man in there. He doesn't have anybody who understands his game and will speak up for him.
But it doesn't have to be. You know what I'm saying? That's why, and I respect you so much as a historian. This is just responding as a human being. Whatever happened with the Russians that didn't alter the election, that didn't alter the fact that I won, I want to make sure that whatever the Russians did then, they don't do again. And I, as leader of this country, am not going to allow it to happen again. But I've heard no criticism of Russia, no threat of acting tough on Russia. So I think that as president, he is almost giving an engraved invitation for that all to happen again, courtesy Russia.
Well, if you were in there or I were in there, that's exactly what we'd be advising him to use better words if he chose them. But as far as Russia affecting our elections, I mean, if they wanted to elect Trump, they could have just withheld the $500,000 they gave to Bill Clinton to give a speech that you can watch on YouTube for free.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that they could have done differently. And Russia will always try to influence other elections. And are we kidding? We try to influence other elections. We've influenced elections all over the world. That's what ambassadors do. They've done it from the beginning. The French ambassador wanted Jefferson, and the British ambassador wanted Adams. And that's not going to stop. You can't threaten other nations and say you got to stay. The internet's open and free, and it's going to be pretty hard to pass any kind of laws to keep people from speaking up. We're a free society.
And you can't, all these
speak.
people have been indicted from Russia. It's not as if they're going to come over to the country and then subject themselves to our questioning, right?
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Doug Wead, on all those developments here.